Prime Minister Carney a window to underscore his message that Canada won't wait for Washington's permission to push its own deals with other countries.
The difference between criticism and action by the US on Canada and China, I think that really shows that it's important. We must be masters in our own home.
Here's what nobody on American television will tell you. Canada stopped waiting for us. While USMCA talks went nowhere, Canada locked in a 1 million barrel a day pipeline pointing straight at Asia and signed trade deals Washington hadn't even been notified about. This didn't happen to Canada. Canada chose this, and we handed them every single reason why. Hit subscribe. This breakdown is overdue. Let's set the scene. May 15th, 2026, Calgary. Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, two leaders who not long ago couldn't agree on the color of the sky, stood on the same stage, signed the same paper, and shook hands in front of the entire country. That moment wasn't just political theater. That was Canada telling the world, we're done waiting.
After months of negotiations, Ottawa and Alberta have signed a historic energy agreement, one that paves the way for another pipeline to the West Coast. If all goes according to plan, construction could begin as early as next year.
The proposed West Coast oil pipeline would transport more than 1 million barrels of oil per day.
We're building trust of investors, that Alberta and Canada are reliable and attractive destinations where opportunities are plentiful.
Here's what that actually means in plain numbers. The industrial carbon price locked in at $130 per ton by 2040, and a federal-provincial implementation agreement that removes 9 major regulatory roadblocks that had been strangling Alberta's energy sector for over a decade. This isn't a press release. This is a structural shift.
I think that the Prime Minister, because of all of his travels, he's seen the real sense of urgency in Asia, who would be the ultimate destination of that oil, to accelerate a pipeline proposal. And we've also seen how quickly the Americans have moved. They've approved a number of pipeline permits for South Bow as well as for Enbridge. And so I think that that's created a sense of urgency, which is why we were able to develop some clear timelines for conditional approval by October the 1st.
Read that back slowly. Premier Smith just said the urgency to build this pipeline came partly from watching how fast America moves on its own energy projects. Canada looked at Washington greenlighting American pipelines at record speed, while simultaneously threatening Canada with tariffs, and thought, fine, we'll build our own lane, and that lane points east. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable for anyone still defending this administration's Canada policy. Right now, 93% of Canada's total oil exports go to the United States. Let that number sit for a second. 93%. Canada has essentially had one customer for its most valuable resource, and that customer spent the last year threatening it with tariffs, calling it a future 51st state, and treating a decades-long ally like a bargaining chip. So what did Canada do? It didn't beg. It didn't fold. It opened a completely new front.
Back in January, when Carney announced a landmark trade agreement with China over EVs and agricultural products, Trump intensified the trade feud, threatening Canada with a 100% tariff. Joining us now is Kellyanne Shaw, former Deputy Assistant on International Economic Affairs during President Trump's first term.
This is the part I genuinely struggle to explain without feeling embarrassed for our side. In January 2026, Carney flew to Beijing, sat down with President Xi, and walked out with a deal. 49,000 Chinese EVs entering Canada at 6.1% tariff in exchange for China slashing duties on Canadian canola, lobster, and agricultural exports. Canada's goal: grow exports to China by 50% before 2030. Trump's response? A Truth Social post threatening 100% tariffs on all Canadian goods. Immediately. No negotiation, no call. A social media post. And Carney's response to that? He went back to Davos, stood at the world's biggest economic stage, and said on camera, in front of every global leader watching, middle powers must act together, because if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. He didn't say Trump's name. He didn't have to. Every single person in that room knew exactly who he was talking about. And instead of that moment cooling things down, it lit the fuse on something much bigger, a unified Canada that Trump's own aggression accidentally built from the inside out. Because here's the twist nobody in Washington seems to have noticed yet. The harder Trump pushed, the closer Ottawa and Alberta got. Two governments that had been fighting each other for years suddenly found common ground, and that common ground is now a pipeline pointed directly at Asia. Think about what that actually costs America, not just economically, but strategically, and we're only getting started. While Canada was signing historic deals and mapping oil routes to Asia, Washington was doing something very different. It was picking fights over milk. I wish I was being dramatic. The same administration that let the USMCA review deadline quietly slip past July 1st, with zero formal negotiations started, was busy threatening Canada with enforcement actions over dairy access, liquor shelf space, and online streaming rules. That's what's on Washington's priority list while Canada builds a billion-dollar pipeline corridor to the Pacific.
Last month, Prime Minister Carney had said that things are, quote, not normal with the Ottawa-Washington relationship when it comes to trade. I think I know where this is going to go, but how do experts in D.C. read the relationship?
Yeah, well, I don't think the prime minister is wrong. I would say things are really at a standstill. I have not seen this level of effectively non-communication between the United States and Canada as back in the first administration when things were really turning south between the two trading partners as part of that NAFTA renegotiation.
That's not a Canadian journalist saying this. That's Kellyanne Shaw, someone who literally sat inside Trump's economic team during his first term. She's calling it a standstill. She's comparing it to the darkest chapter of the NAFTA collapse, and she said it with the kind of calm that only comes when someone already knows how bad the situation really is. But it gets worse.
I've actually heard that quite a bit from administration officials. That really is the impression in the broader Washington policy circles on the Hill. Part of it has to do with statements that have been made by certain individuals in the press about Canada's strategy should be to effectively wait the president out. And again, because Canada, at least from the Washington perspective, doesn't seem like they're coming to the table in terms of the substance in a meaningful way.
So here's what Washington actually believes: that Canada is deliberately slow-walking the USMCA review, sitting back and running out the clock on Trump. And while that narrative plays well on Capitol Hill, here's the ground reality nobody in D.C. wants to admit. Canada isn't slow-walking anything. Canada is speed-building in the opposite direction. Mexico already started formal technical trade talks. Canada's chief negotiator was in Washington and came back with nothing concrete. The scoreboard right now? Mexico is engaging, Canada is pivoting east, and America is threatening enforcement actions over provincial liquor regulations. This is what losing an ally looks like from the inside: slow, bureaucratic, and completely self-inflicted. Now here's the piece of this story that almost nobody is connecting, and it might be the most important twist of all. Trump's entire pressure campaign on Canada was built on a quiet assumption that Canada was fragile enough to crack from the inside. Alberta separatists were growing louder. Over 700,000 Albertans had signed petitions demanding a referendum on leaving Canada. The country looked divided, stressed, and vulnerable. And Trump kept turning up the heat, expecting the seams to split.
In the many conversations we've had over the years, in the lead up to this type of a moment, you cited, a lack of willingness to invest based on a climate that you said was created by the former prime minister. What about your own role at this moment in impacting the investment environment? You seem determined to hold a referendum premier on separation despite the court ruling this week. And we heard from the head of ATCO very recently that prospect is having an impact right now at this moment. Absolutely, she said, it's impacting investments now.
ATCO, one of Alberta's most powerful energy companies, publicly warned that the very talk of separation was already spooking investors. Real money, real impact, right now. That's how serious the internal fracture was. And yet, somehow, instead of Canada falling apart under that pressure, Carney walked into Calgary, stood next to Danielle Smith, and signed a deal that gave Alberta more than it had won in a decade of fighting Ottawa.
It's always important, Rosemary, and you said it properly. I'm the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, so one of the main responsibilities I have is to ensure that our federation works well in the interests of all Canadians and every region of the country. The Alberta economy and the natural resource economy of Western Canada is important to the whole country. I come from Atlantic Canada, Rosemary. An awful lot of people are earning a living and benefiting economically in my part of the country from the resource economy in the West.
The federal government just stood up in public and said Alberta's economy matters to all of Canada, not as a talking point, as a signed binding commitment. Carbon pricing relief, regulatory exemptions, a pipeline timeline, Indigenous co-ownership frameworks. Trump tried to fracture Canada and accidentally gave Carney the political cover to do something no Liberal Prime Minister had done in years, actually show up for Alberta. The country that was supposed to splinter is now more coordinated than it's been in a generation. I want to be straight with you here, not as a commentator, but as someone who genuinely wants America to come out of this era stronger. What we are watching right now is not Canada losing. Canada is not the one scrambling. Canada signed a pipeline deal. Canada opened an Asian trade corridor. Canada patched its biggest internal fault line. Canada's negotiator is in Washington, and Washington has nothing to show for it. We are the ones with nothing to show for it. The USMCA review deadline came and went. Mexico stepped up to the table. Canada stepped around the table entirely and went to build a new one, facing east. And while all of that was happening, our administration was posting on Truth Social about hockey, threatening 100% tariffs that never materialized, calling Canada's Prime Minister, Governor Carney, like it was some kind of clever insult that would change the price of oil. It didn't. What it did do, and this is the part that genuinely stings, is push a country that sends us 93% of its oil exports into the arms of Asia. We did that, not Canada. We created the urgency that built that pipeline deal. We created the friction that brought Carney and Smith together. We created the market anxiety that made Asian buyers look like a safer long-term bet than us. I don't say this to pile on. I say it because the only way to fix a mistake is to actually name it. And right now, the mistake has a pipeline attached to it, and that pipeline is pointed away from us. Canada didn't ditch America because it wanted to. It built an exit because we kept blocking the front door. 1 million barrels a day, a unified federal-provincial government, a China trade deal, an Asia pipeline. None of this existed 2 years ago. All of it exists now. So the real question, the one worth sitting with, isn't whether Canada moved on. It's whether America will course correct before that pipeline hits full capacity, and we realize we've permanently lost our most reliable neighbor as a captive customer. Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this video made you think differently about anything, like it, share it, and subscribe, because we are just getting started.